Hello students. This is your first lecture in NEET Biology crash course. The first topic is the living world. So this chapter begins with the characteristics of living. What are the characteristics of living beings that make them different from non-living? So there are several characteristics like growth, reproduction, metabolism, consciousness, locomotion. We are going to look at them one by one. First is growth. When does growth occur in living organism? When there is an increase in mass plus increase in individual cells. Right? Growth occurs when anabolic reactions exceed catabolic reactions. That is when growth will occur. Growth occurs in all living organisms, plants as well as animals, unicellulars as well as multicellulars. However, the patterns of growth in different organisms are different. For instance, growth in plants versus growth in animals. Is there any difference in the growth that occurs in plants and animals? Growth in plants is said to be unlimited, whereas growth in animals is said to be limited. They grow only till a certain age and then stop growing. So that is the difference between growth in plants and animals. Growth occurs in unicellulars. Growth also occurs in multicellulars. However, there is a difference that occurs in the growth. Growth in unicellulars is said to be equal to reproduction. Growth when an organism grows into two organisms, this is growth as well as reproduction. Growth and reproduction are mutually inclusive events. They both are the same. However, in multicellular organisms, growth occurs in a different manner and reproduction occurs in a different manner, right? So growth is not equal to reproduction. In multicellulars, growth and reproduction are said to be mutually exclusive events. Differences. Next, does growth occur in non-living? Growth occurs in living, but does growth occur in non-living? Yes. Think of snow-capped mountains. What happens? In snow-capped mountains, every year the snow will be deposited. So non-living are also capable of growth, but their growth is only from the outside, not from the inside. So that is called extrinsic growth. And in living, it is intrinsic growth. Also, whatever grows, it's possible to degrow also. For instance, in summer season, it will again degrow. So it is said to be reversible type of growth. And this one is said to be in living, it is an irreversible type of growth. Once growth is permanent. Irreversible. Okay, so growth, since it occurs in non-living as well, so that's why it cannot be considered as the defining criteria of living, since living के साथ साथ non-living में भी होता है. So growth, not a defining criteria. So with that, we move to the second one. Characteristics of living. Reproduction. What is meant by reproduction? All living organisms reproduce, isn't it? Reproduction. What is the process of reproduction? It is the production of offsprings by parents, right? Just like themselves. Production of offspring by parents. It is of two different types. Which are the two different types? Asexual reproduction and sexual reproduction. What is the difference between asexual and sexual reproduction? Asexual reproduction, one parent involved, and here two parents are involved. Exception being hermaphrodites. Give an example of hermaphrodite. Earthworm. Okay? Two parents are involved. Exception is hermaphrodites, wherein one parent involved. Second, what about involvement of gametes? Gametes may or may not be involved. And over here, gametes are involved and gametic fusion is also involved. Gametes are involved only, plus gametic fusion is also involved. And over here, gametes may or may not be involved. So we are going to look at the different types of asexual reproduction, 4 different types. Binary fission. Next we are going to do budding. Next we will see fragmentation. Next we'll see regeneration. Binary fission, give examples of organisms: amoeba, bacteria. Budding, give examples: hydra, yeast. Fragmentation, spirogyra. Then protonema of mosses. Fungi. Fungi में भी होता है fragmentation. Regeneration, give examples: planaria, starfish. So what are these different types? Binary fission. What happens in binary fission? One cell divides into two daughter cells. What are these called? Daughter cells. This is the parent. Okay, and in budding, one cell develops a small protrusion like this. Okay, and then that will separate into two. Over here also, these two are called daughter cells. So one parent cell divides into two daughter cells. But what is the difference? What is the difference between this one and this one? One parent is divided into two daughter cells. So the difference is that in the binary fission, daughter cells are said to be equal. Also the parent ceases to exist. Okay, parent ceases to exist. No longer there. Over here, parent exists. Daughter cells are said to be unequal. One of them is the parent. Parent cell exists. Next is fragmentation. Fragmentation, what happens in fragmentation? One strand accidentally breaks into many strands, and each of these strands can grow into individual filaments. Okay, there is an accidental breakage. Next, regeneration, example planaria. Over here also, this is, let's say, planaria. There is an accidental breakage into 3-4 pieces. Each of the pieces will grow into an individual planaria. Okay, that is called regeneration. But if you carefully look at fragmentation, regeneration, it looks the same, no? One strand, there is an accidental breakage into many, and over here also there is an accidental breakage into many pieces. Accidental breakage, it does not do it on its own. Okay, and each one of them growing. So what is the difference? So this one occurs in very simple organisms, this one occurs in complex organisms. Okay, so you have to say complex organisms, and this one occurs in simple organisms. What else? No totipotent cells are involved in fragmentation, however totipotent cells are involved. So that was reproduction. Oh, by the way, so reproduction occurs in all living organisms. Absolutely all living organisms. What about worker bees or mules or infertile couples who cannot have children? So can they be called as non-living if they are not able to reproduce? So that's the reason reproduction cannot be considered as the defining criteria. Write that point down. Since worker bees, mules, then infertile couples unable to reproduce, therefore reproduction not a defining criteria. So growth is not the defining criteria for living, reproduction is not the defining criteria for living. Then what is a defining criteria for living? So let's look at the next one. My lecture has notes. I have attached the notes into the description. So let us look at the third characteristic of living, that is metabolism. What is meant by metabolism? It is the sum of all chemical reactions that occur. Okay, sum of all the chemical reactions that occur in the body is called metabolism. So there are two types of chemical reactions that occur in the body, that is anabolic reactions and catabolic reactions. Anabolic reactions means build-up reactions, and catabolic reactions means breakdown reactions. Build-up reactions, example, photosynthesis, build-up reaction. Catabolic reaction, example, respiration, breakdown reaction. Growth happens, metabolism is the sum of anabolic plus catabolic reactions. So we can say metabolism is equal to anabolic plus catabolic reactions, and growth will occur when anabolic reactions exceed catabolic reactions. Okay, if catabolic reactions are more, for example in case of cancer, then degrowth happens. Okay, next, Okay, isolated chemical reactions in vitro. In vitro means, let's say you take a test tube and you put salivary amylase plus starch into this. So starch is acted upon by salivary amylase, the same process that occurs in our mouth. So if this reaction occurs in the mouth, this is metabolic reaction. But is this a living reaction? This is a living reaction, living metabolic reaction. What about this? This is a living reaction? Yes, this is a living reaction. But so is this a living being? Is this a living system? So no, this cannot be a living system. This is still a non-living system. So isolated chemical reactions in vitro are non-living reactions. System is are living reactions. System is non-living. These chemical reactions that take place here will be living reactions, but this system will be non-living. Metabolism is considered as the defining criteria for living. Considered as the defining criteria of living. Fine. Next, we move on to the next characteristic, that is consciousness. Consciousness is also called as awareness, sensitivity, irritability, in simple words, consciousness is the response given to stimulus, right? Response to stimulus, that is called consciousness. All living organisms have it. It is the most obvious and technically complicated feature of living beings. For example, seasonal breeders, like horse, radish, seasonal breeder. What is the stimulus? Stimulus is photo period. Humans are the only animals that have consciousness plus self-consciousness. Self-consciousness and self-awareness. What is self-awareness? Means awareness of one's own thoughts and feelings. Awareness of one's thoughts and feelings. Means animals are we are the only ones who can imagine us from outside like this. Okay, that's called self-awareness. Patients in coma do not have self-awareness, and they are said to be brain dead people, neither living nor nor non-living. Patients in coma do not have self-awareness. They are brain dead. Okay? And consciousness is a defining criteria of living. It is considered as a defining criteria. Finally, we move on to the last characteristic, that is cellular organization. For anything to be called living, it has to have at least one cell. For example, bacteria, protozoa, amoeba. It has minimum one cell. That's why the little guy is called living. If it did not have the cell, it would not be called living. Okay? Cellular organization is a defining criteria of living. Okay? Minimum one cell is required for something to be called living. Okay? For example, amoeba, bacteria. What about viruses? Viruses, neither living nor non-living, since they do not have a cell. They do not have a cell, so they are considered neither living nor non-living. Fine. So these were the different characteristics of living.
महादेव के नाम पे सब्सक्राइब कर दें।